Hey guys, tonight we begin where every overly ambitious historical saga begins, with a speech that goes way too far and somehow gets wildly out of hand. You're sitting in the crisp November chill of 1095 in the town of Clermont, France. You're not nobility, you're not even particularly well fed, but you're there, standing in a muddy crowd, listening to a man in dazzling robes. He's Pope Urban II, and his voice booms with fire and frenzy as he speaks of unimaginable sins, sacred duty, and the East, always the East. You squint toward the makeshift stage as he claims Christians in the Holy Land are being slaughtered by barbaric forces, churches defiled, and pilgrims tortured. You've never been east of the next village, but the words light a strange fire in your gut. And then he says it. Deus vult. God wills it. People repeat it like a chant, their eyes wide, fists clenched, blood already boiling. Some fall to their knees. Others swear oaths on the spot. You're swept up in it, the surge of the crowd, the contagious zeal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You return home with a promise on your lips. You're not the only one. All over Europe, thousands are preparing to answer the Pope's call. Some are knights with lands and armour. Others are peasants with pitchforks, or priests with dreams of martyrdom. A few are just bored nobles, looking for a sanctioned excuse to break skulls and maybe grab a villa in the process. You pack your things, what little you have. A woolen cloak, your father's dented knife, a crust of bread, and a relic from your village priest. A sliver of wood that might, just might, be from the true cross. You sew a red cross on your tunic. It's itchy and crooked, but it marks you as a crusader, a soldier of Christ. You're told your sins are forgiven already, just for signing up. A handy perk, especially for the more murderous types in your group. The journey east isn't exactly first class. You walk, a lot. Your feet blister, your stomach growls, and half the people who started with you have either died, turned back, or joined rival groups. It's less sacred pilgrimage and more chaotic medieval road trip. But something keeps you going. Maybe it's faith. Maybe it's peer pressure. Maybe it's the terrifying monk who keeps yelling apocalyptic predictions. That would be Peter the Hermit, barefoot, wild-eyed, and dragging an ever-growing horde of peasants behind him. Historians still argue whether Peter truly influenced Urban's call or just jumped on the holy bandwagon afterward. Either way, his crowd ends up pillaging Jewish communities in Germany before even reaching Constantinople. Crusading, it turns out, isn't always selective in its violence. Eventually, you arrive at Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. You've never seen anything like it. Gleaming mosaics, golden domes, spices in the air. It's like another world. Emperor Alexios I looks at you and the rest of your ragged companions with barely concealed concern. He's hoping for elite reinforcements, not smelly zealots who think bathing is optional. Still, he ferries you across the Bosporus, one less problem on his side of the water. Welcome to Anatolia. It's dry, it's rocky, it's crawling with Seljuk Turks who know the land better than anyone and who've been preparing for your arrival with the enthusiasm of someone setting mousetraps. You fight at Dorylaeum, your first major taste of real battle. Arrows rain down, horses scream, and somewhere in the chaos you lose a tooth. But the Franks regroup, flank the enemy, and pull off a gritty win. It's the kind of gritty win where you celebrate by passing out and hoping no one loots your boots. The crusade grinds forward, through Cilicia, through Antioch. Each step is harder than the last. Antioch's siege becomes a nightmare. Disease, starvation, betrayal, all bundled in with your daily prayers. One man swears he found the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced Christ's side, buried beneath a church. He might have just found a broken tent pole, but the troops believe it. They rally. They win. It's becoming clear that belief, true or fabricated, is a powerful fuel. You've started to wonder how many holy relics are actually mislabeled firewood, but you carry yours all the same. You've seen death now, a lot of it, not just enemy soldiers, your friends too. A boy you shared bread with last week now lies buried under a heap of stones. A knight who taught you how to lace your armor bled out clutching a rosary. Crusading, it turns out, is less about glory and more about endurance. Still, you push on. toward Jerusalem, toward the goal, toward whatever miracle you've convinced yourself waits at the end. One quirky fact: some crusaders reportedly shaved crosses into their heads to keep their purpose top of mind. Effective branding, if not very sun-safe. You're almost there. The heat is suffocating. Your tunic stinks. Your relic now smells faintly of goat. But you don't stop. Jerusalem rises in the distance like a dream, golden and silent, for now. You draw your blade. You kiss your cross. You wipe sweat from your brow and whisper, God wills it. But so do 1,000 others, many with sharper blades and far messier intentions. You approach the walls of Jerusalem with cracked lips, blistered heels, and the certainty that this city, this single, sun-bleached cluster of stones, will either save your soul or swallow it whole. It's June of 1099, and the First Crusade has arrived at its climax. From a distance, Jerusalem gleams like a holy jewel. Up close, it stinks like every other besieged medieval city. Sweat, sewage, death. The Fatimid defenders, having retaken it from the Seljuks a year earlier, aren't exactly thrilled to see your army camping outside their gates. They're well supplied. You are not. Your siege equipment? You don't have any, yet. The surrounding land is bare, stripped clean by earlier armies. But the local Maronite Christians, not thrilled with their Fatimid overlords, point you toward a forest near the coast. You help cut down trees, drag them across the desert, build siege towers with hands more suited to plows than war machines. You keep telling yourself it's divine work, but by the third splinter under your thumbnail, even divine work starts to feel suspiciously like unpaid labor. One night, a priest leads a barefoot procession around the city, chanting psalms. Dust kicks up. The heat is unbearable. You follow, not because you're certain it'll work, but because everyone else is doing it. There's a quiet desperation in the air, like maybe, if you circle the walls enough times, they'll simply collapse from guilt. Eventually, you storm the city. The date is July 15th. You climb the siege towers, arrows whizzing past like angry bees. Someone shouts, "The Lord is with us." Someone else screams and falls. You keep climbing. Then breach, chaos. And then the gates are open. What happens next, you probably won't survive. Morally, if not physically. The accounts vary, as always. Some say the Crusaders ran amok, killing every Muslim, Jew, and even some Christians in their path. Others claim the blood ran ankle deep in the streets. That might be medieval exaggeration, but you do know one thing. It's not a gentle takeover. Historians still argue whether this massacre was a spontaneous frenzy or sanctioned vengeance, but you watch as holy men swing swords and chant hymns in the same breath. And yes, you see it too. A group of knights riding into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They slaughter everyone inside. Then they pause and pray. Welcome to holy war. You eventually find a quiet moment among the rubble. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre looms in front of you. You're barefoot, bloody, hands trembling. You kneel and press your forehead to the stone floor. Is this what salvation feels like? Because honestly, it smells like old sweat and ash. In the days that follow, you help clean the city. Not spiritually, mind you, just physically. The rot sets in fast. Flies gather. Bodies pile up. But there's glory too. Raymond of Toulouse refuses to be king. Godfrey of Bouillon takes the role of defender of the Holy Sepulchre. You think that's just code for king with a more pious job title. But who's asking? You're assigned to patrol the walls. It's oddly quiet now. A few pilgrims arrive, wide-eyed and sunburned. Some are confused to find Jerusalem already liberated. Others are just looking for holy dirt to scoop into jars and sell back home. One man claims his toe cured itself when he touched the city walls. Another swears he saw Christ in a dust cloud. Fringe miracle or heat stroke? You can't say. Meanwhile, the newly carved crusader kingdom of Jerusalem is surrounded by angry neighbors. You start to realize this isn't the end of a journey. It's the start of a very, very precarious new chapter. Holding the city is going to be harder than taking it. Supply lines are fragile. Reinforcements are few. And the desert doesn't care how holy your banner is. It'll kill you just the same. Then there's the curious case of Tancred, a Norman prince who carves out his own mini-realm within the chaos. Brave? Yes. Ambitious? Definitely. willing to bend Christian unity in his own favor, without hesitation. Crusading, it turns out, is less about piety and more about PR. Tancred even sponsors his own mini-miracles. One supposedly involves a sword that glows when infidels are near. That one doesn't make it into the official church records. But don't worry, you're not bored. There's plenty of raiding to do. Local villages, trade routes, rival factions. You're still fighting, still praying, still sweating into your boots. And every time your blade draws blood, you whisper a prayer to keep the guilt at bay. At night, you lie awake in a stone barracks, wondering if God is pleased or just confused. The stars above Jerusalem look no different than the stars back home, and that's somehow the most unsettling part. You meet new arrivals, men who weren't there for the first crusade but came later to secure the gains. They're cockier, more polished, less hollowed out by desert and death. One of them tries to flirt with a local girl by bragging about how many Saracens he's never met. You sigh. And here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Some crusaders actually mailed bits of Jerusalem back home in wax-sealed pouches. Dust, pebbles, dirt. Sacred souvenirs for loved ones who couldn't come. Sort of like a medieval version of a fridge magnet, if the fridge also required years of marching and potential decapitation. By now, you've realized something. This victory is temporary. The Fatimids regroup, armies reform. You've taken the city, yes, but the question hanging over you is simple and ominous. How long can you keep it? Your sword is dull. Your faith flickers. Your skin burns. But you stay, because the cross on your chest is sewn too deep to remove. The blood has barely dried on the stones of Jerusalem, but already you can feel it. This isn't peace. It's the kind of silence that hangs before another storm. You've helped seize the holiest city in Christendom, and in doing so, you've kicked a very large, very complicated hornet's nest. You now serve in the kingdom of Jerusalem, a patchwork of castles, parched farmland, and fragile truces. Life here is nothing like you imagined during that teary-eyed sermon back in France. For one thing, the climate is trying to kill you. You've traded mud for sand, and armor becomes a slow-cooking death trap by noon. Your skin peels like old parchment. You wrap a rag around your head just to avoid boiling your brain. A few of your fellow knights go fully native, wearing loose robes, adopting Arabic phrases, even drinking coffee. Heresy? Or just good hydration? Historians still argue whether early Frankish settlers adapted out of respect or sheer survival instinct. And then there's the politics. Oh, the politics. You thought this would be a spiritual mission. But here you are, caught in a medieval game of thrones with bishops, barons, and warlords playing chess with human lives. Baldwin I, Godfrey's brother, becomes king, not defender, but actual king of Jerusalem. He rules like a man who knows he's outnumbered, but refuses to show it. You nod when he passes, but deep down, you're wondering how long this patchwork kingdom can hold. The crusader states, Jerusalem, Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli, sprout like fragile weeds across the Levant. Each one has its own flavor of chaos. You're posted at a castle near Tripoli for a time. It's a sun-bleached fortress of stone and salt, half-finished and always understaffed. You stand night watch with one hand on your sword, the other swatting mosquitoes. You hear whispers of ambushes, poisoned wells, and spies dressed as pilgrims. At Antioch, things are even stranger. The city is ruled by Bohemond, a Norman with a jawline carved by ambition. He declares himself prince and refuses to hand the city back to the Byzantines as promised. You ask your fellow soldiers what the penalty is for breaking an oath to the emperor. One of them mutters, "A letter from Constantinople and a poisoned wine jug, probably." That's the thing. Your enemy isn't always a Muslim army. Sometimes it's the Greek merchant who shortchanged your bread ration. Sometimes it's your fellow crusader who stabbed a rival over a wine barrel. And sometimes it's a Fatimid assassin sneaking into your camp at dawn. Still, you fight. Raids are common. Every few weeks, a local emir tests the border, pokes the crusader defenses like a bear prod. You mount up, draw your blade, ride out into the dust. You lose friends. You gain scars. You win battles that history forgets within a decade. And all the while, pilgrims keep arriving. They come from England, Italy, France. Most unarmed, sunburned, wide-eyed. Some are devout. Others are just in it for the souvenirs. They come with stories. Europe is buzzing with tales of your conquest. Songs are sung about Jerusalem. Miracles are claimed. One French baker supposedly levitated after eating dirt from the holy city. Quirky, yes, but also good marketing. But not everyone is thrilled with your holy work. In Europe, word spreads about the massacres during the conquest. Some monks applaud it, others wince. Back home, your name might be spoken with reverence or disgust, you'll never know. Meanwhile, relations with the Byzantine Empire sour. Emperor Alexios feels cheated, and frankly, so do you. He expected returned cities and loyalty. You expected reinforcements and supplies. Instead, there's a lot of awkward silence and political shade. At one point, a Byzantine envoy visits and refuses to kneel at your king's court. You watch the whole thing with a stale loaf of bread in hand, wondering if they'll start stabbing each other over titles and ceremonial footstools. But the real threat never sleeps. In the East, Muslim leaders start rallying. They've been fractured, divided by sect, territory, and old grudges. But that's changing. You hear the name Zengi whispered like a warning in the wind. A new kind of leader, a unifier. In your quiet moments, rare as they are, you sit beneath a stunted olive tree outside your post and sharpen your sword. You trace your fingers over the red cross on your tunic, now stained brown with sweat and sun. You ask yourself, was it worth it? Was the miracle worth the massacre? One of your companions, a weathered knight from Provence, says something that sticks with you. The Holy Land is less holy when you live in it. But you're still here, still defending castles that look more like heat traps than heaven, still chasing rumors of relics, holy springs, and second comings, still trying to make sense of a war that wears the mask of salvation. The castles become your world. Crac de Chevalier, Belvoir, Montreal, immense, intimidating, and isolated. They're marvels of architecture, sure, but they're also signals of desperation. Fortresses mean one thing. You're not planning on leaving anytime soon. You patrol the walls, repair stonework, watch the horizon for dust clouds. Always watching, always waiting. Even now, you can feel it. Something is coming. Something bigger. And this time, it won't just be arrows and swords. It'll be strategy, unity, vengeance. You wake one morning to the sound of distant hooves. Not in battle, but in procession. Another noble caravan has arrived, clinking chainmail, perfumed horses, banners snapping in the wind like they're competing for attention. These are the fresh imports. Knights from Europe still sunburnt from the sea voyage, squinting at the harsh Levant light like tourists on their first crusade-themed vacation. You, meanwhile, are a veteran. You've already run the gauntlet from Clermont to Jerusalem, and now you're stationed in the very bones of the crusader machine, the castles. And oh, the castles. They rise out of the rock like angry stone beasts. Crac de Chevalier, perched high with a view that stretches for miles. Margat, with walls thick enough to shrug off catapults. These aren't just fortresses. They're lifelines. When the kingdom starts fraying at the edges, and it always does, it's these hulking outposts that keep the crusader states stitched together. You're sent to Kerak, a fortress clinging to the red cliffs of Moab. It's a brooding pile of towers, halls, and chapels, haunted more by politics than ghosts. You spend your days reinforcing the walls, boiling pitch, and arguing about whose turn it is to stand watch in the south tower, which smells like spoiled lentils. The Lord of Kerak, Renaud of Châtillon, has a reputation. Part madman, part pirate, part religious wildcard. He once attacked Muslim pilgrims during a truce. Another time, he allegedly tried to launch a boat across the desert to raid Mecca. You're still not sure if that part was satire or strategy. Historians still argue whether Reynald was a reckless crusader hero or just a heat-maddened lunatic. Either way, he's a reminder. Crusader rule is improvisational at best. Your daily life is more builder than warrior. You lay stones. You fetch water from distant wells. You carve Christian crosses into rock like graffiti, left by the holy board. Every night, you recite prayers, not just for your soul, but for rain, and ideally for your horse not to die of exhaustion. And yet, the locals are always watching. Arabic farmers till the land you now defend. Armenian merchants pass through with silk and spices. There's tension, yes, but also trade. Over time, you pick up a few words of Arabic, barter for olives, share a joke. Occasionally, you see a local child bow before a chapel, just in case all these gods are interchangeable. This world is complex. It's not the binary of good crusaders and evil Saracens they preached in France. It's intermarriages, fragile treaties, shared wells, and an uneasy, dusty truce. You ride patrols between the crusader states, Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, and Edessa. Each one is barely hanging on. You pass pilgrims, knights, monks, and the occasional con artist selling relics. One man swears his mummified hand is from St. John the Baptist. You later see him using it to stir stew. Then comes word. Edessa has fallen. Gone. Overnight, a crusader state is erased from the map. You weren't there, but you hear the tales. Zengi of Mosul storms the city in 1144. The defenders are overwhelmed. Christian survivors are dragged from homes. Churches burned, relics lost. It's the first major defeat, the first crack in the illusion that you were meant to win this holy war by default. You sit with your comrades in the castle courtyard, chewing dry meat and wondering what it means. If Edessa can fall, what about Antioch, Tripoli, Jerusalem? Europe panics. Pope Eugenius III calls for another crusade. You'd expect enthusiasm. Instead, there's confusion. Crusading isn't new anymore. It's an institution, and institutions get bogged down by paperwork, tax exemptions, and a growing list of martyrs. Still, the Second Crusade forms, this time with royalty. King Louis VII of France, Emperor Conrad III of Germany. Their armies swell with hopes, prayers, and horses that have never seen desert sand. They arrive in the east like a thunderstorm, dramatic, loud, and short-lived. You watch their march through Anatolia turn into a logistical nightmare. Supply lines stretch thin, morale cracks, soldiers starve. At Dorylaeum, the Germans are ambushed, shattered. You hear the survivors mutter about cursed roads and cursed kings. Eventually, they arrive in the Levant and decide to besiege Damascus. You raise an eyebrow. Damascus, you see, is not exactly the enemy. In fact, they've occasionally allied with the Crusaders against mutual threats. But the Europeans don't know, or don't care. You join the siege, you hack at trees, dig trenches, throw insults over the walls. And then, just when the city feels within reach, everything unravels. The army withdraws. No explanation, just frustration. King Louis sulks. Conrad sails home. The Second Crusade ends not with triumph, but with a faint whimper and sunburned nobility limping back to Europe. You're left with questions. Was it worth the deaths, the gold, the alliances broken and trust shattered? Still, back in your fortress, you prepare for the next storm. You sharpen your blade, stack barrels, count arrows. The Fatimids are quiet for now. But you know silence isn't peace, it's preparation. Quirky tidbit of the day. Some crusaders, desperate to raise funds, leased out their castles like medieval Airbnbs. Guests included merchants, mercenaries, and, rumour has it, a mystic who claimed to turn blood into wine. It tasted like vinegar, but hey, miracles are subjective. You lean against the stone battlements at dusk. The sky turns copper. A hawk circles overhead. Jerusalem is still yours, for now, but the land is shifting beneath your feet, and you can feel it. Change is coming. It wears a green banner, and it rides with purpose. The sun bakes the horizon, and the silence from the east grows heavier by the day. Edessa is gone, and the Second Crusade has dissolved into finger-pointing and sunburn. You're still here, tending a cracked shield, watching distant trade caravans snake across the hills, waiting for the next tremor in this shaky kingdom of faith. And tremble it does. In 1174, a new name begins to echo through the stone halls of your castle. You first hear it in whispers from prisoners, then from traders, pilgrims, even your own captains. One name, swelling louder with every retelling, Saladin, not a bandit warlord, not a tribal chief, a leader of terrifying skill and far more unsettling patience. Born into Crete, raised in Damascus, trained under his uncle Shirkuh, Saladin begins where others failed, with unity, one banner, one command, one long game. You watch as he tightens his grip on Syria, then Egypt, then the horizon. Still, life continues. Your patrols take you through fertile fields around Nablus and Hebron, where Frankish settlers have built small, awkward farms, like French villages surgically planted in a desert. You barter for wine, you repair a chapel. You avoid eye contact with locals who pretend not to understand your language, even though you're sure they do. Jerusalem itself seems unchanged. Pilgrims still crawl through the streets on their knees. murmuring prayers and clutching crosses like lifelines. But the city feels brittle, like a shell. And then the storm breaks. You're stationed in the north when news arrives. Saladin has attacked Tiberias. You scramble to gear up. Your armor creaks. Your horse paws the dust. Word spreads fast. He's lured King Guy and the entire Crusader army into the hills. You ride hard for the horns of Hattin. July 1187. You remember the heat first. It claws at your throat. The wind carries no mercy. Your army trudges uphill, parched, confused, and already splintering. Saladin's men control the water sources. You haven't had a full drink in a day. The horns rise ahead, two steep ridges framing a volcanic plain. Saladin has arranged his troops with surgical precision. Arrows hiss from above. Smoke from burning brush chokes your lungs. Your comrades falter, shields splinter, lines break. You see King Guy's tent fall. You see the true cross, the actual relic, captured. You see your kingdom crumble. Historians still argue whether it was arrogance, incompetence, or clever deception that doomed the Franks at Hattin. All you know is this: it's a rout. By sunset, the once mighty Crusader army is reduced to charred corpses and rattling chains. You're lucky. You're captured, not killed. And somehow you survive long enough to be ransomed back. Others aren't so fortunate. Renaud of Chatillon, the desert pirate lord of Kerak, is personally executed by Saladin, beheaded after refusing to convert. King Guy is spared but shamed. The rest, scattered, dead, imprisoned. And Jerusalem, Saladin marches on it like fate. By the time you return, the city is surrounded. You help man the walls, trembling as siege engines grind into position. But the defenders are few. Supplies are low. Morale is lower. Yet this siege is different. Saladin does not massacre. He offers terms, humane ones. Civilians may buy their freedom. Christians are not slaughtered en masse. Some historians say it's political savvy. Others say it's genuine mercy. Either way, you watch as banners change hands with dignity, not blood. You leave Jerusalem through the Jaffa Gate. Behind you, the city falls. You grip your sword tight. It suddenly feels very small. You retreat to Tyre, one of the last Crusader strongholds still holding out. The air smells like salt and desperation. Refugees choke the gates. Survivors wander like ghosts. You help patch walls, stack stones, tend to the wounded. At night, the stars seem sharper. You wonder if they shine different now that Jerusalem is no longer yours. And yet, the wheels turn again. Back in Europe, the fall of the Holy City sends shockwaves across every court and church. Kings who once squabbled now take oaths of revenge. A new crusade stirs. The Third Crusade. This time is not just nobles and fanatics. It's kings. Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip Augustus of France, and, most famously, Richard the Lionheart of England, a man whose name sounds like a tavern tale and who fights like he knows it. You watch the coast swell with fleets. Ships crowd the harbour like angry fish. Banners flutter, trumpets blare. Richard arrives in 1191 and immediately begins wrecking shop. First, he conquers Cyprus, because why not? Then he marches on Acre, laying siege to the city in one of the most brutal, slow-motion brawls of the Crusades. You join him there. The trenches reek, arrows rain down. A trebuchet, cheekily named God's Hammer, hurls boulders that split men like overripe melons. Days blur into nights. Disease spreads. You pray beside corpses. Eventually, Acre falls. The Muslim garrison surrenders under negotiated terms. Then Richard breaks those terms. He orders the execution of 2,700 prisoners. You don't watch. You just plug your ears and stare at the sea. Quirky fact of the day: Richard brought a full-time royal minstrel named Blondel, who allegedly tried to locate Richard during his later captivity by singing his favourite tunes under castle windows. Historians disagree whether this ever happened, or if it was just medieval fan fiction. With Acre secured, Richard advances south, engaging Saladin in a series of tense, brilliant skirmishes, especially the Battle of Arsuf, where he turns what should have been a trap into a textbook counterstrike. You fight in the lines, shoulder to shoulder, and for a moment, you believe in something again. But he never retakes Jerusalem. Why? That's the great question. Historians still debate whether it was lack of supplies, fear of overstretch, or sheer exhaustion. Richard makes it to within sight of the city, but turns back. Eventually, he signs a truce with Saladin. Christians will be allowed safe pilgrimage to the holy city, but it will not be theirs. Not now. You sail home, or maybe stay behind in Acre, unsure if this war was a victory or a draw. You've fought under 3 kings, seen Jerusalem change hands, watched 2 crusades fail and one nearly succeed. And now you wonder, how many more will it take? You no longer measure time by seasons or years, but by the colour of banners over cities, red crosses, green crescents, and the occasional gold lion flapping over a scorched hill. You're still in Acre, patched back together from siege and truce, but the dust hasn't settled, because peace, like water in this land, never stays still. It's the early 1990s, and word spreads fast. Even without Twitter, Saladin is dead. The great unifier, the man who defeated kings and spared cities, has left behind a fracturing legacy. His sons inherit his lands, but not his charisma. Rivalries bloom, truces fray, and you, still wearing a faded cross on your tabard, start to feel something you haven't felt in years. Opportunity. But Europe has moved on, mostly. The memory of the Third Crusade has faded into tavern songs and sermons. King Richard, captured on his way home, ransomed like some holy antique. Philip of France returns to petty wars. England brews with internal squabbles. Everyone's tired, broke, less eager to die in the sand for relics they've never seen. Still, a 4th crusade is declared. You shake your head when you hear about it, not because you doubt the mission. Heaven knows you're used to holy ambition, but because of the sponsor, Venice. Yes, the city of masked merchants, salt-soaked sailors, and deals that smell like fish and profit. The Republic of Venice agrees to ferry the crusading army to Egypt, but only if they pay. Spoiler, they can't. You watch from the docks as this strange expedition derails before it even leaves the harbour. The Crusaders owe Venice gold they don't have, so the Venetians cut a deal. Help us capture Zara, a Christian city. Oops. And we'll call it even. You blink. They agree. They sack Zara, horrifying the Pope. Excommunicated? Absolutely. Still, the journey limps forward. And then, another detour. A Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, offers to bankroll the whole crusade if they help him reclaim the throne in Constantinople. More gold, more promises, more moral fog. You sit on the edge of a campfire, hearing second-hand tales, and can't quite believe it. They go. They siege Constantinople, Christian city, remember, and in 1204, they breach its walls. The sack is catastrophic. They loot churches, defile altars, melt relics for coins. One knight reportedly sits on the emperor's throne, drunk and grinning. The greatest Christian city in the East is brought to its knees by other Christians. Historians still argue whether the Fourth Crusade was hijacked or simply wandered into chaos like a drunken goat on a marble floor. You just feel numb. Meanwhile, back in the Holy Land, what's left of the Crusader states is hanging on by chipped fingernails. The kingdom has no real capital. Jerusalem is still under Muslim control. Acre serves as the de facto hub. You walk its narrow streets, filled with beggars, pilgrims, merchants, and mercenaries. Every alley smells like cloves, dust, and danger. And yet, despite everything, people still arrive. The Fifth Crusade launches. This time, Egypt is the target again. The theory being, take Egypt, and the rest of the Muslim world will collapse like a poorly stacked bread cart. You march with them, down into the Nile Delta, toward Damietta. Siege engines creak. Floodwaters rise. You fight in waist-deep mud against fierce resistance. The city falls. Victory feels real again. Then the Crusaders get cocky. They push toward Cairo. Logistics fall apart. Nile floods trap the army. Cut off, surrounded, and forced to surrender. It's a disaster. Again. Later, in 1229, Emperor Frederick II tries something radical. He negotiates. Imagine that. Frederick, excommunicated and flamboyant, cuts a deal with Sultan al-Kamil. Jerusalem is returned to Christian control without a single sword drawn. No siege, no slaughter, just signatures. You walk back into the city and find it eerily intact. It's cleaner than the last time you saw it. Fewer skulls, more olive trees. You kneel in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, unsure whether to weep, cheer, or squint suspiciously. Frederick crowns himself in the church. No priest anoints him. The Pope is still furious. But Jerusalem is, briefly, back under a cross. Still, it doesn't last. Within 15 years, it's gone again. Muslim forces retake it. The deal dies with the fragile politics of the time. By now, you don't flinch. Jerusalem changing hands is like sunrise. It's happened so often it feels scheduled. You fight smaller campaigns now. Skirmishes near Beaufort Castle, a raid near Gaza, a tense standoff in the Galilee. Your joints ache. Your sword arm isn't what it used to be. One day, you help escort a group of new recruits, fresh from Marseille. They look at you, hollow-eyed and tanned like old leather, and ask what it's like to see the Holy Land. You answer, holy, yes, but not gentle. They laugh. You don't. Still, you're not without humour. Here's your quirky tidbit. During these years, some crusaders reportedly carried dried oranges sown with cloves and rosemary into battle. Not for flavour, but to mask the smell of blood. Perfumed war. A very medieval solution. Back in Acre, now bloated with displaced nobles and ambitious merchants, you see new orders rise. The Templars and Hospitallers become permanent fixtures. Part monks, part warriors, part landlords. Their fortresses outshine kings. Their influence grows like ivy. You suspect that if you wait long enough, one of them will just quietly declare themselves king, and no one will argue. You still wear your cross, though it's faded. Still fight for Christendom, though the lines blur. Still hope for peace, though you've forgotten what that looks like. And deep down, you wonder, will the cross ever stop marching? Will the crescent ever stop defending? Will this land ever stop bleeding? You lean against a sun-warmed stone wall. The answer, as always, is not yet. The sea wind cuts against your face as you stand on the ramparts of Acre, the last reliable crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. The sun rises with a faint golden glow over the Mediterranean, but it's not comforting. It's clinical. You've been stationed here longer than you care to admit, and you've seen it all. The desperation of reinforcements, the endless rotations of holy men, merchants, mercenaries, and monarchs pretending to care. But now there's a new kind of restlessness in the air. A new crusade has been declared. You're not surprised. They've been happening with the regularity of bad weather. But this one's different. It's led by King Louis IX of France, known for his piety, his polished armour, and the unnerving tendency to treat every battlefield like a portable cathedral. It's 1248, and Louis is all in on a seventh crusade, and his target, like many before him, is Egypt. The logic remains the same. Egypt is the jugular vein of the Muslim world. Sever it, and the rest will faint. You're too old for illusions, but you board the ship anyway. The voyage is cursed from the start. Sickness spreads below deck. Rats run along your legs as you try to sleep. But eventually, you arrive at Damietta, and, miracle of miracles, you take the city almost effortlessly. The Egyptian garrison flees. You march in without resistance. There's singing, there's weeping. Some say it's the hand of God. You squint at the horizon and mutter, too easy. You're right, because just weeks later, the Nile floods. The roads vanish. The fields turn to quicksand. The crusading army, drunk on victory, is suddenly stranded. Then comes the Battle of Al-Mansura. Narrow streets, brutal ambushes. The Crusaders, led by Louis's brother, Robert of Artois, charge in without a plan. You follow behind. Arrows rain down. Blades flash in the tight alleyways. Robert is cut down. You barely escape. You retreat, bleeding, limping, cursing. Eventually, surrounded and starving, Louis is captured. Yes, an actual king, shackled and ransomed like a common brigand. You watch from a distance as he's led away by Mamluk guards, his white tunic stained with sweat and failure. It's a staggering humiliation, but also kind of familiar. Because by now, this is the rhythm of crusades. Optimism, offense, overreach, and collapse. Louis is ransomed. He retreats to Acre. And this is where things get strange. He stays. For years. Not as a warrior, but as a sort of caretaker, a king without a crown clinging to the illusion of Christendom's frontier. You walk the streets of Acre during his long stay. It's a bizarre time. Priests chant beside beggars. Templars train beside merchants. Eastern Christians argue with Western bishops over what day Easter should fall on. Everyone's holy, no one's happy. It's like a divine waiting room. One quirky tidbit. During this period, Louis allegedly had relics brought from France, including a splinter of the True Cross, which he wrapped in silk and carried like a pocket totem. Historians still debate whether the relic was real or if it had once belonged to someone's firewood pile. Still, Louis is sincere. You see him distributing alms, washing peasants' feet, praying constantly. He's either a saint or a man slowly falling apart. Meanwhile, far to the east, something darker stirs. You hear rumours first. Whispers carried by caravans. Cities burning. Entire armies erased. The Mongols, they come like a sandstorm, unrelenting, unpredictable. Hulagu Khan sacks Baghdad in 1258. You hear the caliph was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. It sounds like legend. Then again, so did Jerusalem once. You start to wonder if the Crusaders might ally with the Mongols. After all, they both hate the same people, and they're both terrifying. A few envoys are sent, a few letters exchanged. Some Mongol generals even claim to be sympathetic to Christianity. But nothing solid happens. The Crusaders are too disorganized. The Mongols, too busy obliterating cities to wait around for Latin diplomacy. Still, the Mamluks, the elite Muslim warrior class that now rules Egypt, aren't taking any chances. You watch them rise from the Nile like phantoms. Former slave soldiers, now kings. Agile, ruthless, devout, and terrifyingly competent. They destroy the Mongols at the Battle of Ain-Jalut in 1260. It's a seismic moment. For the first time, the Mongol tide is turned, and the Mamluks, riding high on victory, turn their gaze back to the coast, to you, to Acre, Tripoli, Antioch. Over the next decade, they dismantle the Crusader states piece by piece. Antioch falls in 1268, Tripoli in 1289. You're posted to Acre, watching cities vanish from your maps like snuffed candles. You know what's coming. You try to prepare, reinforce the walls, train new recruits, pray harder, laugh louder. But you've seen enough to know. No one survives forever in a borrowed land. Your quirky fact for the day. In Acre, during its final years, some noble families still held masquerade balls, with imported wine, silk costumes, and hired musicians flown in from Europe, while siege towers were being assembled just outside the city walls. Nothing says we're in denial like dancing in a fortress that's already cracking. And still, Louis returns. He's older, slower, but not done. He launches the Eighth Crusade in 1270, this time targeting Tunis. A strange choice. Some think he hoped to convert the local sultan. Others believe he just ran out of maps. He lands, camps, and dies of dysentery before any real fighting. Just like that. The most devout king of the Crusades dies in a fetid tent on a North African beach. His army sails home. You remain. There's no triumph left. Only defense. But you still wear your cross. Still man the walls. Still whisper prayers as the sea wind howls through the tower slits. Jerusalem is gone. Edessa is dust. Antioch is smoke. All that remains now is Acre, and even you know it won't be for long. The sea glitters behind you, but you don't turn to look. Your eyes are locked on the horizon inland, where the dust rises like smoke and the air shimmers with heat and bad news. You're in Acre, the last Crusader foothold in the Holy Land, and though the city bustles with markets, chants and murmured hope, something is rotten in the stone. It's 1290 and the writing's on the wall. Literally. Someone scrawled, "Jerusalem is lost. Acre is next." On a chapel door last week. You pretended not to see it, but you felt it. The Mamluks are coming. You've seen this pattern before. One by one, the other Crusader cities have fallen. Antioch, obliterated. Tripoli, gone despite its walls and prayers. Now it's your turn. And this time, there's no Louis, no Richard, no shiny European king on horseback. Just you, and the ghosts of every promise ever made. But before the final blow, let's rewind just slightly, because there's still one more almost crusade. Back in Europe, there's a brief flicker of enthusiasm. Pope Nicholas IV talks up a new campaign. Banners are stitched, ships are chartered. Knights sip their wine and pretend they're eager. But the will isn't there. Europe is fractured. Too many wars, too many debts, too many bored barons who'd rather kill each other closer to home. Still, a few Italian and French knights arrive in Acre. Most are loud, drunk, eager to prove themselves. They pick fights with local Muslims in the markets, breaking truces with all the subtlety of a drunken goat. The Mamluks take notice. And then Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil marches. You watch as his army gathers. Siege towers, mangonels, archers in tight formation. Tens of thousands. He's not coming to negotiate. He's coming to erase you. The siege begins in May 1291. You're on the walls the first morning, eyes stinging from the smoke. Stone crashes against stone. Arrows whir like wasps. The towers sway with impact. Every prayer feels recycled. Acre's defenders fight hard. Templars, Hospitallers, locals, pilgrims, even merchants grab swords and join the fray. You pour boiling oil from the ramparts. You drive back ladders. You fight in the streets, the alleys, the very courtyards of churches once meant for peace. But it's no use. The walls fall. The city is breached. The final stand happens at the Templar fortress, a last defiant lump of stone on the edge of the sea. You retreat there with a few hundred survivors. The harbour burns behind you. Civilians scream. The city is ash and blood. For 2 more days, the fortress holds. Then collapse. A sudden, thunderous implosion. Bodies, bricks, banners, all vanish into the sea. The last crusader stronghold in the Holy Land is gone. Historians still debate whether the collapse of the Templar citadel was structural failure or deliberate sabotage to prevent capture. You don't know. You were inside. You're lucky to have crawled out. You take a ship to Cyprus. Not because you think the fight will continue, but because there's nothing left to fight for. You settle in Limassol, a city where old knights drink and argue about battles long lost. Some swear the Crusades will return, that a 9th campaign is brewing, that one day they'll reclaim Jerusalem. You nod politely, but you've seen the truth. The era of Crusader kingdoms is over. That doesn't stop others from trying to revive the dream. There's the Shepherd's Crusade, a wild, disorganized movement of peasants, children, and self-proclaimed prophets who claim visions and demand passage to the Holy Land. It ends in chaos, arrests, massacres, no ships, no battles, just confusion and sorrow. Or the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396, where French and Hungarian forces march against the Ottomans and are decisively crushed. Thousands killed, nobles captured, ransoms demanded. It's called a crusade, but it feels more like a poorly planned vacation with swords. You start to see the word crusade everywhere. Against heretics in Bohemia, against pagans in Lithuania, against Cathars in France. It's no longer just about Jerusalem. It's become a concept, a weaponized word for any war someone wants to feel holy. Your quirky fact. At one point, the Pope offers indulgences, spiritual get-out-of-hell-free cards, not just for fighting, but for donating to a crusade you don't even have to attend. The Holy Land becomes a checkbox on a donation ledger. And then, the Ottomans rise. You feel the pressure from the east, growing, hungry, organized. In 1453, they take Constantinople. Yes, the city once sacked by crusaders now falls to the Ottomans. It's a thunderclap. The second Rome becomes Istanbul. The last whispers of Byzantine resistance are extinguished. The Christian world gasps. The Muslim world consolidates. And you sit in a shaded courtyard in Cyprus, watching young boys train with wooden swords, not knowing the land they dream of reclaiming is already history. Because here's the truth they don't print in the victory scrolls. Crusades weren't just battles. They were beliefs, delusions, wounds, legends, and sometimes simple confusion wrapped in holy rhetoric. You once believed you were saving the world. Now you just hope you didn't ruin it too much along the way. You wake to the rustle of parchment and the faint crack of boots on marble. But it's not a battlefield this time. It's a lecture hall somewhere in Paris, or Rome, or maybe Cologne. You're no longer on the front lines. You're in the pages. The Crusades, it turns out, have become a subject, Clerics argue, chroniclers embellish. Kings sponsor manuscripts that paint themselves as heroes. You sit in the back of a candlelit scriptorium, watching monks with ink-stained fingers write your life as if it were a chess game. One move, one motive, no mistakes. You almost laugh. They don't mention the sand in your boots, the stink of fear in a collapsing trench, the way your sword shook the first time you buried it in a man's chest and realized his eyes would never stop looking. Nope, just glory, honor, and God's will. And now, as the age of crusades as you knew them fades, a new form emerges. Paper crusades. They still issue calls for campaigns, but most of them don't go anywhere. The popes, still obsessed with reclaiming the Holy Land, now rely more on threats and diplomacy than swords. They float ideas of attacking Egypt, Tunis, even Constantinople again, but fewer kings are listening. Too many debts, too much plague, too many failures. Still, they try. In the late 15th century, Pope Pius II actually proposes leading a crusade himself, personally, sword in hand. It's bold, it's theatrical. He dies before he boards the ship. You shake your head. Of course he does. By now, the world has changed. Gunpowder has arrived. Castles tremble beneath cannon fire. Swords are still worn, but more as symbols than serious tools. Warfare has grown up, and the age of chivalry, let's just say it's been retired with full honours and a suspicious amount of wine. But the idea of the Crusades remains potent. Every new conflict with the Ottoman Empire is given a holy spin. When the Battle of Lepanto happens in 1571, a great naval clash between Christian Europe and the Ottomans, it's billed as a kind of floating crusade. Trumpets, prayer vigils, everyone back home cheering. You hear that the Venetians prayed before a painting of the Virgin Mary holding a sword, probably symbolic, hopefully. The Ottomans lose that battle, but they don't go away. Their empire stretches across 3 continents, and Jerusalem remains firmly under Islamic control. You walk through a cathedral back in Europe and see stained glass of the Holy City, a place of eternal peace, glowing gold in the sun. You almost choke on your bread. You've seen Jerusalem, the real one. Mud, blood, market stalls, burning incense, cracked walls. You remember its uneven cobblestones, not its idealized halos. You pass a sermon one day where a preacher calls for another crusade, this time against the Protestants. Yes, you heard that right. The term has fully mutated now. It's no longer geographic, it's theological, political, personal. You hear of crusades against heresy, against witches, against new ideas. The word survives because it's useful, heavy with righteousness, shiny with past glories. But the actual thing, the raw, dusty, desperate marching to Jerusalem thing, is gone. Or is it? In the 17th and 18th centuries, travellers begin to re-enter the Holy Land. Not soldiers, but pilgrims, explorers, and later archaeologists. They look for crusader ruins. They find bones, coins, cracked mosaics, some whisper of lost relics. Others try to reconstruct old fortresses, or guess where certain saints died. A few British gentlemen build entire theories around secret Templar treasure, though mostly they find sand and scorpions. You think, maybe that's fitting. Meanwhile, the Templars, long dissolved, betrayed and persecuted, begin to take on mythic proportions. They pop up in novels, paintings, even secret society rumours. Historians still argue whether they were early bankers or just glorified knights with good branding. Either way, they outlived their castles. You're living now in a quieter time, but the ghosts remain. A farmer in France ploughs up a rusted crusader sword and thinks it's a sign. A monk in Venice rewrites a crusade chronicle with extra miracles. A child in England plays with a toy knight and asks, "Did we win?" You smile. Define win. Your quirky fact tonight. One noblewoman, Eleanor of Aquitaine, joined the Second Crusade dressed in armour, though some said she wore it over silk and others claimed it was mostly for show. Either way, she made more of an impact than many of the men who followed her. You light a candle, not for prayers, just for the warmth. Outside, the world hums on. Cities grow, kingdoms fall, empires rise and collapse. And somewhere, beneath a forgotten hill near the Jordan, your old boot still lies buried with the dust of 1,000 others. Because that's what the Crusades were in the end. A story half told, a dream half remembered. a scar in the shape of a cross. You're sipping thin wine in a smoky tavern near Avignon when the word hits your ears like a cymbal crash. Crusade. But this time is not against Muslims or even infidels in faraway lands. It's against Christians. You blink, choke slightly, wipe your lips. Because that word, once reserved for Jerusalem and shining swords, is now franchised, applied to any group the church once flattened. You hear about the Albigensian Crusade, declared in 1209, and feel the earth shift beneath your boots. The enemy isn't in the Levant, it's in southern France, Languedoc, rolling green hills, vineyards, and villages full of quiet heretics known as the Cathars. They believe the world is evil, that the flesh is corrupt, that the Catholic Church is, let's say, not their favorite institution. So the Pope decides, enough heresy, time to bring the sword. You don't go, but plenty of crusaders do. It's a mess, a brutal one. You hear the infamous line from the siege of Béziers, kill them all, God will know his own. Even for crusaders, that's a bit much. Entire towns are torched, civilians cut down, chapels go from sacred to charred overnight. And yet, it's sanctioned, blessed, crusaded. You realize something. The brand has changed. No longer confined to desert sand and holy relics, the word crusade now applies to internal housecleaning, a sword dressed in theology aimed inward. The Inquisition grows from this soil. You see its roots in these campaigns, how popes learned that force plus scripture equals obedience. You hear about inquisitors in long robes asking simple questions with sharp consequences, heresy trials, forced confessions, ashes where libraries used to be. You write it off at first as excess, then you start to notice it everywhere. In the Northern Crusades, for instance, where the Teutonic Knights, a kind of Germanic fusion of monk and soldier, begin purging pagan tribes in the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. It's freezing, brutal. God's work, allegedly. But you see a lot of land grabbing for men who wear white cloaks with black crosses. You travel north one year just to see it. It's surreal. Snow instead of sand, pine instead of palm. But the rhythm is familiar. Fortresses rise, native cultures fall, churches built on burned-out shrines. The Sword Brothers, later absorbed by the Teutonic Order, are ruthless. One chronicler writes of forced baptisms conducted at sword point. Another mentions entire villages drowned to avoid feeding them. Yet in the chronicles, it's victory. Always victory. You sit by a fire with an old knight who fought near Lake Peipus, where Russians and Teutons clashed on ice. He shakes his head. We slid around like fools, but they still called it a holy war. You nod. Of course they did. Here's your quirky tidbit. Teutonic knights were so rich and bureaucratic by the 14th century that they once issued internal audits of their castles. Imagine it, a war order of monks with checklists. Sword count, 174. Grain sacks, 28. Number of heretics executed this month, pending. It's not just Europe either. The Reconquista in Spain is heating up. Another long, slow crusade, this one to push Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. It's been simmering for centuries, but now it's full-blown. You hear about battles near Toledo, Cordoba, Granada, kings declaring divine right to every step forward, crosses planted, mosques repurposed, laws rewritten. You wander through Aragon, watching processions of captured banners and forced conversions. It looks less like salvation and more like branding. By now you can tell the Crusades have become customizable, a plug-and-play model for spiritual war. Got a conflict? Slap a cross on it. Want land? A title? Indulgences? There's a crusade for that. Even Venice gets in on the game again, leading mini-expeditions around the Aegean. Pirates, merchants, holy men. They're all in the same boat now, literally. And let's not forget the Children's Crusade, which still haunts you. A bizarre movement in the early 13th century, where thousands of children, yes, actual children, believed they could peacefully reclaim Jerusalem through purity and prayer. Led by shepherd boys and strange visions, they marched south, only to be tricked, sold into slavery, or simply vanish. Historians still argue whether it truly happened the way the stories say, or if it was a cautionary tale invented after the fact, but you remember hearing whispers of it from dock workers. They never came back, someone once told you. They walked into the sea. You stir your drink, you can't count how many crusades there have been by now. There's the 6th, which recaptured Jerusalem through negotiation. The 7th and 8th, which blared in Egypt and Tunis. The northern, the Iberian, the papal, the political. Each one starting with a sermon, a seal, and a set of very optimistic maps. But fewer return with relics. Fewer still return with their faith intact. You write letters to old comrades, half of whom are now monks or merchants. One became a beekeeper. Another built a tavern called the Pilgrim's Respite, no irony intended. And every year, fewer people wear the cross. The red thread fades. The zeal softens, but the legacy lingers like smoke in a cathedral's rafters. And it's not done yet, because new empires are rising, and some of them are watching these old patterns with very sharp eyes. The sea winds carry a bitter bite now, tinged with the faint smell of salt, damp wood, and forgotten prayers. You're older, your hands tremble more often, your sword arm aches when the cold creeps in, but you're still here, still in the east, still watching the last embers of Christendom's kingdom flicker under siege. It's the mid-1200s, and the crusader states are holding on by habit more than hope. You patrol the ramparts of Acre, the de facto capital, with its thick stone walls and sprawling bazaars. There's a familiar rhythm to the city, pilgrims coming in, relics going out, merchants swindling everyone equally. But beneath it all, a tension coils. You know the signs by now. Loose bricks, extra ships in the harbour, that faraway look in the eyes of the city guards. Everyone's pretending like things are fine, but you've been through too many false dawns. A few miles inland, the countryside is no longer dotted with hopeful settlements, just ruins, crumbling churches, abandoned way stations once guarded by hospitallers. You pass a half-buried stone cross, leaning like a drunk soldier, its inscription faded by wind and regret. The Mamluks are coming again. You've faced them before. You know their discipline, their speed. Born from the ranks of once enslaved warriors, they now command some of the most efficient armies in the known world. And their target is clear. Acre, it's all that remains. Jerusalem, long gone. Antioch, flattened. Tripoli, lost just last year in 1289. The coast is peeling away like old paint, revealing nothing but loss beneath it. You still remember Tripoli's fall. You weren't there, but you heard the stories. How the Mamluks surrounded it with terrifying speed. How the defenders, weakened and fractured, couldn't hold the walls. How the nobles tried to flee by sea, leaving chaos behind, children trampled, churches burned, a bishop strangled with his own stole. You ask one of the younger soldiers if he's ever seen Tripoli. He says, only on a prayer map. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. So here you are, Acre, 1291, and the Mamluks are massing. Again, you see the campfires first. Dozens, then hundreds, twinkling on the hillsides like a mocking constellation. Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil leads them now, young, determined, calculating. He's inherited not only a powerful army, but a mission. Finish what his father started. Wipe the Crusaders from the Holy Land, completely. You and the other defenders prepare the best you can. The Templars hold the sea-facing tower. The Hospitallers control the west wall. Civilians dig trenches. Nobles make plans to flee by boat. Quietly, of course. Every night, the city sounds louder. More church bells, more prayer, more noise to drown out the panic. And then, it begins. May 1291. Siege towers roll into position. Engines pound the walls with relentless rhythm. Arrows rain down like hail. You fight on the battlements, hacking at ladders, pouring oil, praying between blows. The enemy is too many. They breach the eastern wall first. You rush there with a group of knights, but it's like plugging a dam with your thumb. Streets flood with Mamluk infantry. Civilians scream, smoke rises. You retreat to the Templar fortress, along with the last defenders. The rest of the city is chaos, looting, slaughter, fire. The harbour is clogged with ships fleeing in every direction. Mothers tossing infants onto departing boats. Priests handing out last rites like water. For 2 more days, you hold. The fortress is ancient, thick-walled, nearly impregnable. Nearly. On the third day, the walls collapse, literally. A massive blast, perhaps a powder stash, perhaps sabotage, brings down the southern tower. Bodies, stone, banners, all crash into the sea below. You survive. Barely. Crawling across the shattered courtyard, slipping through a secret passage to the docks. A Templar shoves you into a rowboat. You don't even know his name. You float away from Acre, watching it shrink behind you. Once a city of saints, sinners, and dreamers. Now just smoke. That was the end. The true, final end. No more crusader strongholds in the Levant. No Jerusalem, no Antioch, no Acre. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders could have held the city longer, whether reinforcements could have saved it. But you know better. The Crusader states weren't defeated on the battlefield. They were exhausted, overstretched, undersupplied, broken from within by rivalries, betrayals, and pride. You sail to Cyprus, the last semi-functional outpost of Crusader governance. The air there is humid, and everything smells of seaweed and disappointment. You find a room in Limassol, watch the harbour, talk to men who once dreamed of banners over Jerusalem. Now they trade olives and fish. A few brave or foolish leaders propose one more crusade, always one more. But nothing comes. Europe is moving on. Plague is creeping in. Monarchs squabble over thrones, not relics. Trade becomes more important than tombs. And the Holy Land, now just a memory painted on cathedral ceilings. Here's your quirky fact. Even after Acre's fall, some European nobles kept their crusading vows, sailing all the way to Cyprus, realizing the war was over, and just camping. A few reportedly conquered small nearby islands, held mass, and returned home, calling it a spiritual victory. You think that about sums it up. Still, you wear your old cross sometimes, not for faith, for remembrance. Not everyone will remember what was built, lost, burned, and buried, but you will. Because for 200 years, men and women followed a red thread across deserts, rivers, and oceans, chasing a vision they never fully understood. Now it's ashes, but it happened. You were there, you carry it in your bones, and even if no one comes again, you'll keep the memory, just a little longer. Your eyes. Cyprus is where they send all the leftovers. You know that now. Every dock creaks with the weight of people who thought they'd be saving souls in Jerusalem and now sell goat cheese in Famagusta. The city has a kind of uneasy bustle, half military outpost, half retirement village for men who used to swing swords with purpose. Now they swing deals over spice, wine, and old stories that keep getting more heroic every time they're told. You've learned to keep your mouth shut during those stories, especially when someone calls the fall of Acre a noble defeat. You spend your mornings walking the waterfront. Gulls scream above. Somewhere, a boy tries to balance a wooden sword on his palm. You see old knights begging for bread, Templars in civilian robes, hospitallers huddled in cloisters, muttering about maps and debts and what comes next. But you already know what's coming. Nothing. Because Europe isn't sending another crusade. Not really. They say they will. They always say that. But no new fleets arrive, no kings with shining banners. Just envoys, merchants, a few desperate monks dragging coffers full of indulgences. Instead, you hear stories of new empires rising from the east. The Ottomans. They're not like the fractured emirs of old. They are centralized, organized, and terrifyingly efficient. What started as a small Anatolian beylik has become a rising star. They conquer by land and sea, one city at a time, weaving conquest with diplomacy like a tapestry. Their soldiers march in lockstep. Their courts bristle with scholars and spies. And they don't fear the cross. Not anymore. You follow the news as the Ottomans expand westward. The Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria. You hear about the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, where Christian armies fall once again. Both sides claim victory, but it's the Ottomans who keep marching. Back in Cyprus, a few still cling to the old crusading identity. The Hospitallers move their base to the island of Rhodes, turning it into a fortress-monastery hybrid. You visit once, high walls, sharp towers, endless ceremony. They're trying to keep the flame alive. Knights still train with morning prayers. Shields still bear red crosses. But even there, you sense the decline. The chants are softer, the supplies thinner. And then, in 1396, comes the Battle of Nicopolis. It's billed as a proper crusade, called by Pope Boniface IX, backed by King Sigismund of Hungary, and attended by French knights in gleaming armour. You remember thinking, maybe this time, but you've been around too long to trust the gleam. Sure enough, the Crusaders charge recklessly into the Ottoman lines, ignoring strategy. The Janissaries, the elite Ottoman troops, wait, counter, destroy. Thousands die. Nobles are captured and ransomed. Another crusade ends in mud and regret. You sit by the fire with other veterans, and no one bothers to pretend anymore. Someone jokes that crusading has become a rich man's hunting trip with a death clause. Everyone chuckles. No one disagrees. Your quirky tidbit of the day. One of the captured French knights at Nicopolis was Jean de Carouge, the same man whose trial by combat would later become legend. Yes, the guy from the last sanctioned duel in France. Crusader, brawler, survivor, kind of a medieval action figure. But even action figures break eventually. By now, the Crusader states are memory. Europe starts looking inward. The Renaissance dawns. Florence, Milan, Venice, Paris. They trade manuscripts, not relics. Paint churches instead of building siege engines. Even the popes become more interested in marble commissions than military campaigns. You get letters, actual letters, from scribes back in Rome, inviting men of good heart and long loyalty to contribute funds to defend Rhodes, or perhaps Constantinople. You don't even bother to respond, because by the time they're writing letters, it's already too late. And sure enough, in 1453, the city of Constantinople, once the heart of Eastern Christendom, falls to the Ottomans. You feel it like a physical blow. It had stood for over 1,000 years. You'd once looted it back in that very awkward Fourth Crusade. Now it belongs to Sultan Mehmed II, who marches in with cannons, strategies, and a terrifying calm. He renames it Istanbul, converts Hagia Sophia into a mosque, rebuilds, renovates, rules. Historians still argue whether the city could have been saved if Europe had acted faster. But you don't argue anymore. You just light a candle, not for the dead, but for the dream that died with them. The last flicker of a crusade dies out in 1464, when Pope Pius II, the same pope who once wrote racy poetry in his youth, declares he will personally lead a crusade against the Ottomans. He sails to Ancona, gives a rousing speech, and dies of a fever before a single ship sets sail. You close your eyes and mutter, fitting, because the age of ironclad pilgrims is over. Now it's age of cartographers, traders, philosophers, and kings who want profit over prayer. Still, the Hospitallers hold out on Rhodes for a while longer. They'll be chased off eventually. Then they'll take Malta. But their role shifts from crusaders to defenders, from saviors to survivors. You sit under the orange trees in your courtyard, sharpening a knife that hasn't seen combat in years. Sometimes the neighbor boy asks what it was like. You think about lying, saying it was all glory and faith. But instead you say, it was long and loud and full of people who were sure they were right. He nods solemnly, not quite understanding, but he will. Because the war is gone, but the idea isn't. And ideas, they have longer lives than men. You dream in flickers now, of sand underfoot, of drums on the wind, of red crosses catching fire. But when you wake, it's Europe that surrounds you. Not Acre, not Antioch, just cobbled streets, candlelit churches, and towns that have never heard a muezzin's call echo at dusk. You've returned home, sort of. The year is creeping past 1500, and the world is shifting like ice cracking beneath your feet. The Crusades as you knew them are gone, but their ghost still walks beside you. And it's not done haunting yet. In a dusty tavern near Toulouse, you overhear a preacher calling for a new, internal crusade, this time against Protestants. You raise an eyebrow. No Saracens, no Holy Land, just neighbours with different Bibles. Yep, that's the future now. You learn that Martin Luther, a German monk, has just nailed a list of grievances to a church door. Not a sword in sight, just parchment and ink. But those words hit harder than most sieges ever did. Europe explodes, not in battles for Jerusalem, but in doctrinal wars. Catholics against Protestants, church against reformers. No red crosses, just red ink and burning books. And yet, they still call them crusades sometimes. The word sticks. It's too useful, too heavy. A way to frame any war in robes and incense, even if it's just about taxes or printing presses. You get another invitation to fight, not in the East. This time it's France, during the French Wars of Religion. One noble calls it a sacred campaign for the true faith. You say nothing, because you've seen what happens when everyone thinks God is on their side. Meanwhile, in Spain, the final pieces of the Reconquista fall into place. Granada, the last Muslim stronghold, surrenders in 1492. You hear about it while sitting in a port town, watching ships load for an entirely different journey. That same year, Columbus sets sail westward, not to reclaim the Holy Land, but to find India by another route. He doesn't find India, but he does find a whole new world. And just like that, the crusading spirit finds a new frontier. Not east, west. You watch as men who once carried swords for Christ now carry flags and muskets onto foreign shores. They say they come in peace. They say they bring salvation. But the trail looks eerily familiar. Crosses planted on strange soil, languages dismissed, temples burned, cultures renamed or erased. It's a colonial crusade, even if they don't call it that. You meet a young sailor who boasts of converting an entire village in the New World. You ask how he did it, he says, with a musket and a Spanish Bible. Of course he did. Your quirky fact tonight. Some of the first Spanish expeditions carried relics from the Holy Land, fragments of old crusader wood, bones labelled Saint Bernard, even copies of the Gospels used in Jerusalem. They believed these would ward off failure, or maybe just give the conquest a nicer smell. Back in Europe, the Ottoman Empire continues its steady march. They now control much of southeastern Europe. Hungary lies shattered. Wallachia fights a losing rearguard action. The word Turk spreads across pamphlets and pulpits like a curse. You read a poem comparing them to the Antichrist. Another calls for a final crusade. Of course, there's always one more. In 1571, the Battle of Lepanto finally gives Europe a symbolic win. A massive naval clash, Christian fleets versus Ottoman ships. Cannons roar, oars snap, sails burn. The Christian coalition wins. Sort of. People back home cheer. Bells ring. Paintings are commissioned. You see one where angels steer the ships. You shake your head. They never show the smoke, or the bodies drifting face down in the surf. Still, Lepanto is hailed as proof that Christendom still has teeth. But it's not a turning point, just a pause. Because the Ottomans recover, the wars continue. And the crusader dream, it keeps changing its clothes. Now it shows up in missions to Asia, in Jesuit letters from Japan, in English sermons calling for purity in the colonies, even in political manifestos where the word crusade is used to rally support against enemies as abstract as vice, heresy, or foreign corruption. You think of the first time you heard Pope Urban's call, the dusty square, the sweat on your brow, the chill in your spine. You wonder what he'd think now. Probably he'd be confused by the globe, and the gunpowder, and the coffee. But he might still recognize the flame in people's eyes when they say Deus vult. The words never died, only the context did. You spend your last years in a quiet village. You plant herbs. You teach the children how to mend leather, how to track birds, how to read the wind. One day, a girl asks if you were really a crusader. You pause, then nod. She asks if you ever found the Holy Land. You say, I found land. Not sure about the holy. She laughs. So do you, and that feels close enough. You live long enough to watch the world forget you. The last of the old crusader fortresses crumble into farmland, their stones carted away by villagers who build humble homes with relics of once mighty dreams. No one remembers the names of the men buried in the crypts. No one visits the chapel ruins, except maybe goats. Goats are devoted pilgrims, apparently. It's the 17th century now. The clatter of swords is fading, replaced by the crack of muskets and the rustle of paper treaties. The world speaks in contracts, currency, and colonies, not relics and indulgences. But still, every so often, The word crusade rises from the ashes, not in the east, not for Jerusalem, but for Europe's conscience. You hear it whispered in court circles, where moral crusades against corruption begin to trend. You see it written in pamphlets urging kings to stamp out witches, Protestants, heretics, and occasionally poets who say too much. Every ruler wants to be a crusader, even if the only thing they're attacking is bad press. You attend a sermon in a new cathedral, gilded, theatrical, more chandelier than sanctuary. The priest raises a hand and thunders, "We are at war with darkness." Everyone nods solemnly. No one seems quite sure what he means, but they all feel righteously important anyway. Then come the Enlightenment thinkers. These fellows wear wigs and use the word crusade, ironically. They write essays with long Latin titles, arguing that the Crusades were tragic, misguided, or romantic failures. One insists they were medieval expressions of proto-nationalist theopolitics. You blink slowly at that sentence. Still, they bring new light to old wounds. They ask questions you'd buried under stone and silence. Why did we go? What did we win? What did we lose? And worse, would we do it again? Then you hear about Napoleon. The man marches into Egypt in 1998, dragging scientists, scholars, and soldiers in matching coats. He says he's not just conquering, he's enlightening. But his ships carry cannons, not Bibles. He doesn't call it a crusade, but others do. Some even compare him to Richard the Lionheart. He doesn't appreciate the comparison. Still, he visits ruins of old crusader castles, notes their dimensions, comments on how poorly they were designed. You chuckle at that. You've slept in those poorly designed towers, sweating through armor and listening for Mamluk hoofbeats. Napoleon doesn't stay long. The desert, it turns out, doesn't care about your philosophies. After him, others follow. Empires, not knights. Flags planted, borders redrawn, local populations civilized. The language changes, but the behavior. You've seen it all before. And here's your quirky fact for the night. During the Victorian era, English tourists began buying stones from old crusader ruins in the Holy Land as souvenirs. Some even chipped off pieces of walls and took them home. Because nothing says spiritual connection like looting sacred architecture with a hammer. You walk through a museum once, probably in London or maybe Vienna. You stand before a display labelled the Crusader era. Behind the glass, rusted chainmail, cracked helmets, coins worn smooth. A placard reads, "These knights sought to reclaim the Holy Land for Christendom." You lean in, whisper, "No, we just tried to survive." They've romanticized it, cleaned it up, removed the screaming. You're not angry, just tired. You visit Jerusalem one last time. It looks different now, quieter, still sacred, but layered like a palimpsest, each faith, each empire, each memory scraped over the last. You walk barefoot through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Light streams through high windows. Incense drifts lazily. A tourist group shuffles by, snapping photos. You kneel, not to pray, just to listen, and you swear, faintly. You hear the clang of a sword, the cry of a pilgrim, a distant Deus vult swallowed by time. You rise, step outside. The sun warms your shoulders. Jerusalem doesn't belong to anyone now. Or maybe it belongs to everyone. The Crusades didn't end. They dissolved into borders, books, and whispered symbols. You carry them with you still, not as pride, but as memory. You live long enough to see the world reframe the word that defined your life. Crusade. It's no longer whispered in chapels or roared in battle. It's printed in headlines, etched on monuments, used in boardrooms, and borrowed by causes that have never seen blood, let alone sand. In the 19th century, the term becomes metaphor. A crusade against poverty, a crusade for justice, a crusade for sanitation. You read a British newspaper article that calls a tax reform policy a crusade for the middle class. You scoff. The last time you heard that word, you were dodging arrows in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, not balancing a budget. But then again, maybe this is the afterlife of a movement. First a war, then a cause, then a brand. Meanwhile, back in the Holy Land, the echoes remain. You walk again through Acre, or rather, what's left of it. Time has softened it, but the bones remain. A stone arch here, a crumbling tower there. Tour guides spin stories for wide-eyed tourists about brave knights and forgotten kings. You keep your mouth shut. They wouldn't want the real version. The hunger, the betrayal, the heat, the way the sand got into everything, the way victory always felt like loss in disguise. The Templars, long dissolved, now belong to conspiracy theories. You see books claiming they guard ancient relics beneath the Vatican. Others say they hid treasure in Scotland, started secret societies. You roll your eyes so hard your helmet nearly slips. You meet a young man in Jerusalem who calls himself a modern crusader. He means it figuratively. He's running a humanitarian project. Clean water, medical tents, food for the displaced. You nod. Finally, a crusade you can support. But still, you hesitate. Because that word, it carries weight. A weight few realize. You think of all those who died under it. Not just Christians, Muslims, Jews, heretics, pagans, innocents. A tidal wave of faith and fear. Historians still argue whether the Crusades were about religion, land, economics, or ego. You know the answer. Yes. They were about all of it. They were a mirror held up to every ambition, dressed in righteousness. You sit in the shade of the Mount of Olives, watching people move through the city, tourists snapping selfies, rabbis chanting psalms, imams calling prayer from minarets, monks carrying olive branches through narrow alleys. You realize this was never just a Christian story. It was never a neat narrative. It was always messy, always human. Here's your quirky fact. There's a tiny church outside Jerusalem that claims to hold the last sword swung in the Crusades. The blade is bent, rusted, hung above the altar like a tired relic. But no one really knows where it came from. It could have belonged to a farmer, a knight, or just a blacksmith with bad luck. You like that. It feels honest. Back home, across Europe, people build neo-Gothic churches, decorate them with crusader motifs. Victorian gentlemen play knight in garden parties, toasting to God and glory. Meanwhile, real swords lie buried beneath olive groves and broken walls. You outlive them all. Not physically, of course, but in memory. Because you were there when the banners rose, when the sea split to let men pass, when the walls of Jerusalem burned and the stones bled and the wind carried cries no one dared record. You hold those memories like holy coins in a forgotten purse, and when people ask if it was worth it, you pause. Then answer, only if we remember what it cost. Because the Crusades weren't just a story of faith. They were a warning, and that warning, quiet, heavy, stitched in red, still hangs in the air. Now let's leave the battlefield behind. Let the swords rust. Let the banners fall still. Let the noise of the past soften into a hum, like wind weaving through the stones of a once proud fortress. You've walked through 200 years of war and hope, faith and fire, across deserts and oceans and stories both cruel and beautiful. You've stood beside kings and beggars, knights and children, saints and scoundrels, all bound by a red cross and a destination they thought could redeem them. But the Holy Land is quieter now, and so are you. Breathe. Inhale the ancient air of Jerusalem at twilight, warm and gold, with incense curling through narrow alleys and soft chants echoing down from hills. Exhale the weight of armor, of guilt, of legacy. You're not marching anymore. You're resting. The noise of history fades, one page at a time. The stones of Acre sleep under the sea. The towers of Antioch crumble in silence. And somewhere, a relic lies buried in the dust, unfound, unneeded, forgotten. Close your eyes. Let the past drift. You've heard its story. You've walked its roads. And now you can sleep. Sweet dreams.